The morning sun cast long shadows across the marble floors of Kensington Palace as Sergeant Thomas Mitchell began his routine patrol. After 15 years of faithful service to the Crown, Thomas had walked these corridors countless times, but today felt different. The autumn air carried an unusual tension that made his red uniform feel heavier than usual. Thomas was known throughout the palace staff for his dedication and keen observation skills. His colleagues often joked that he could spot a misplaced flower from 50 yards away. This attention to detail had earned him the respect of senior officers and the trust of the royal family members he was sworn to protect. As he made his way through the East Wing, Thomas noticed something peculiar. The ornate cabinet in the blue drawing room, a piece that had stood undisturbed for decades, appeared to have been tampered with. The brass lock that normally secured it hung slightly askew, and there were small scratches around the keyhole that suggested recent activity. The cabinet itself was a magnificent piece of 18th-century craftsmanship, standing nearly 7 feet tall with intricate carvings depicting scenes from British history. It had always been locked, containing what staff whispered were precious documents and artifacts from the reign of Queen Victoria. Most guards walked past it without a second glance, but Thomas had always been curious about its contents. His training kicked in immediately. Any unusual activity within the palace walls required investigation. Thomas approached the cabinet carefully, his hand instinctively moving to his radio. The palace had been on heightened security alert recently due to increased media attention surrounding the younger members of the royal family. As he drew closer, Thomas heard something that made his blood run cold, a soft whimpering sound coming from inside the cabinet. His first thought was that someone had hidden a small animal inside, perhaps as some sort of prank. But, as he listened more carefully, he realized the sound was distinctly human, and it carried the unmistakable tone of fear. Thomas's mind raced through possibilities. Had an intruder somehow gained access to the palace and hidden inside? Was someone playing an elaborate joke? Or could this be something far more serious? His years of training had taught him to expect the unexpected, but nothing had prepared him for this moment. The whimpering grew slightly louder, accompanied by what sounded like muffled sobbing. Thomas felt his heart rate increase as he reached for the cabinet door. Protocol dictated that he should call for backup before investigating further, but something about the vulnerability in those sounds compelled him to act quickly. He gently tried the cabinet door and found it unlocked. The brass handle turned smoothly under his touch, and he slowly opened the door, not knowing what he might find inside. The hinges creaked softly in the quiet room, and Thomas held his breath as the interior of the cabinet was revealed. What he saw inside would change everything he thought he knew about his role as a royal guard. Curled up in the bottom corner of the cabinet, surrounded by dusty velvet cloth and old documents, was Princess Charlotte. The young princess, who should have been attending her morning lessons, was instead huddled in this confined space, her face streaked with tears and her usually pristine clothes wrinkled and disheveled. Thomas immediately knelt down to her level, his voice gentle and reassuring. "Your Royal Highness, it's Sergeant Mitchell. Are you hurt? What's wrong?" The princess looked up at him with wide, frightened eyes, but seemed unable to speak. Her small frame was trembling, and Thomas could see that she had been crying for some time. The guard's protective instincts took over completely. Whatever had frightened the princess enough to make her hide in this cabinet was clearly serious. Thomas quickly scanned the room for any signs of danger while keeping one eye on Charlotte. The drawing room appeared normal, with its elegant furniture and priceless artwork undisturbed, but appearances could be deceiving. "It's okay, Your Highness," Thomas said softly, extending his hand toward her. "You're safe now. Can you tell me what happened? Who scared you?" Charlotte looked at his outstretched hand but made no move to take it. Instead, she pressed herself further back into the corner of the cabinet, as if trying to make herself invisible. Thomas realized that simply removing her from the cabinet wouldn't solve the underlying problem. Something or someone had terrified this brave little girl enough to make her seek refuge in such an unusual hiding place. He needed to understand what had happened before he could properly protect her. The princess finally spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "They were shouting," she said, her words broken by small sobs. "The angry voices came back, and I got scared." I remembered what Grandmama told me about the safe places in the palace, and I found this one. Thomas felt a chill run down his spine. The angry voices Charlotte referred to could mean many things, but, combined with her obvious terror, it suggested something far more serious than a simple family disagreement. He had heard rumors among the staff about tensions within the royal household, but seeing their effect on such a young child brought the reality home in a powerful way. The voices can't reach you here, Thomas assured her, his training in crisis management helping him stay calm despite his growing concern. But, you don't need to hide anymore. I'm here to protect you, and I won't let anyone hurt you or scare you. As Thomas knelt beside the cabinet, he realized that this moment represented something much larger than a simple security incident. Princess Charlotte had sought refuge in a place that represented the history and continuity of the monarchy itself. The cabinet, with its ancient documents and artifacts, had become her sanctuary from whatever storm was raging in her young life. The guard understood that he was now part of something that would require delicate handling. This wasn't just about the immediate safety of the princess, but about understanding and addressing the underlying causes of her fear. Thomas had always taken pride in his ability to protect the royal family, but now he was faced with protecting one of them from threats that might come from within their own world. Charlotte's breathing began to slow as Thomas maintained his calm, reassuring presence. He could see that she was starting to trust him, but he also understood that gaining her complete confidence would take time and patience. The princess had clearly been through something traumatic, and rushing her recovery could do more harm than good. "Would you like me to stay here with you for a while?" Thomas asked gently. "We don't have to go anywhere until you're ready." Charlotte nodded slightly, the first positive response she had given since he found her. Thomas settled into a more comfortable position, understanding that this was going to be about more than just physical rescue. As they sat together in the elegant drawing room, with Charlotte still partially hidden in her makeshift sanctuary, Thomas began to realize the full weight of responsibility that had just fallen on his shoulders. He was no longer just a guard following routine protocols, he had become a protector, counselor, and, potentially the key to unraveling whatever had brought one of Britain's youngest royals to such a desperate state. The morning sun continued to stream through the tall windows, casting shifting patterns of light across the room. Thomas knew that somewhere else in the palace, people would soon be looking for Princess Charlotte, wondering why she hadn't appeared for her scheduled activities. But, for now, in this quiet moment, his only concern was helping a frightened child feel safe again. The discovery of Princess Charlotte in the locked cabinet marked the beginning of what Thomas sensed would be a complex and challenging situation. His years of service had prepared him for many scenarios, but nothing quite like this. As he watched over the princess, he began to formulate a plan for how to handle the delicate balance between her immediate needs and the larger implications of what her hiding revealed about life within the palace walls. Thomas remained with Princess Charlotte for nearly an hour, allowing her to slowly emerge from her hiding place at her own pace. During this time, he learned more about the events that had led to her desperate flight to the cabinet. The princess spoke in fragments, describing raised voices, doors slamming, and a general atmosphere of tension that had been building for weeks. As Charlotte gradually became more comfortable, Thomas was able to piece together a picture of what had been happening within the royal household. There had been ongoing disagreements between senior family members about various matters, ranging from public appearances to educational decisions. While these discussions were meant to be private, Charlotte had unfortunately been present during several heated exchanges. The princess explained how she had been practicing piano in a nearby room when the voices became particularly loud and angry. The sound had triggered memories of previous arguments she had witnessed, creating a pattern of fear that had been building over time. Thomas realized that what he was dealing with wasn't just the result of one incident, but the cumulative effect of ongoing stress on a sensitive child. "Sometimes I hide in different places," Charlotte confided, her voice still shaky but growing stronger. "There's a spot behind the tapestry in the library, and a little space under the stairs in the servants' quarters. But this cabinet felt the safest because it has all the old things that remember when the palace was happy." Thomas was struck by the wisdom in her words. This young girl had not only been dealing with adult conflicts that were beyond her understanding, but she had also developed her own coping mechanisms. The cabinet, filled with historical artifacts, represented a connection to more stable times in the monarchy's history. As they talked, Thomas began to understand the complexity of Charlotte's situation. She was caught between her love for her family and her fear of the conflicts that seemed to erupt around her. The princess described feeling responsible for the arguments, believing that if she could just be better or quieter, the adults would stop fighting. "It's not your fault, Your Highness," Thomas said firmly but gently. "Adult disagreements happen for grown-up reasons that have nothing to do with you. Your job is just to be a little girl, not to fix problems that adults need to solve themselves." Charlotte looked at him with a mixture of hope and skepticism. "But what if I did something wrong? What if they're angry because of me?" The vulnerability in her voice reminded Thomas of his own daughter, who was about Charlotte's age. He realized that beneath all the royal protocol and formal education, Charlotte was simply a child who needed reassurance and stability. Thomas decided to share a story from his own experience. He told Charlotte about times when his own parents had disagreements, and how he used to worry that he was somehow to blame. He explained how he later learned that adults sometimes argue about things that have nothing to do with children, and that the arguing doesn't mean they love their children any less. The princess listened intently to Thomas's story, and he could see some of the tension leaving her small shoulders. For the first time since he had found her, she smiled slightly. "Did you ever hide when your parents argued?" she asked. "I did," Thomas admitted. "I had a fort I built in my bedroom closet. I would go there with a flashlight and read books until everything got quiet again." This confession seemed to help Charlotte understand that her reaction was normal and that she wasn't alone in feeling scared sometimes. As they continued talking, Thomas became increasingly aware of footsteps in the corridor outside. He knew that other staff members were likely looking for the princess, and soon her absence would be noticed by family members. He needed to prepare Charlotte for the transition back to her normal routine while ensuring that her underlying concerns were addressed. "Your Highness," Thomas said carefully, "we should probably let people know you're safe. I'm sure there are people who are starting to worry about you. But before we do that, I want you to know that if you ever feel scared again, you can always find me or ask someone to get me. You don't have to hide alone." Charlotte considered this offer seriously. "Will you really help me if I get scared again?" she asked. Thomas nodded solemnly, understanding that he was making a commitment that went beyond his normal duties as a guard. "I promise," he said. "And I also promise that we'll find ways to help with the scary feelings so you won't need to hide as much. There are people whose job it is to help children feel safer and happier." The princess seemed to understand that Thomas was suggesting professional help, and, while she didn't completely understand what that meant, she trusted his judgment. Her willingness to accept help showed Thomas how desperately she needed support and guidance. Before they left the drawing room, Thomas helped Charlotte straighten her clothing and wipe away the last traces of tears. He wanted her to feel dignified and composed when they encountered other people. The princess stood a little taller as Thomas adjusted her hair and smoothed her dress, showing the natural poise that had been temporarily overwhelmed by fear. As they prepared to leave, Charlotte turned back to look at the cabinet one more time. "Will it still be here if I need it again?" she asked. Thomas understood that she wasn't just asking about the physical space, but about the safety and security it represented. "It will always be here," Thomas assured her. "But, hopefully, you won't need to use it anymore because we're going to make sure you have other ways to feel safe." The princess nodded, taking one last look at her temporary sanctuary before taking Thomas's offered hand. Walking through the palace corridors with Princess Charlotte beside him, Thomas felt the weight of the responsibility he had accepted. He was no longer just protecting her from external threats, he had become part of her support system for dealing with the internal challenges of growing up in such a complex environment. As they approached the area where Charlotte's tutors and guardians would be waiting, Thomas could see the princess tensing slightly. He squeezed her hand gently and reminded her that she could signal him if she needed support during any conversations about her absence. The princess looked up at him with gratitude and trust that touched Thomas deeply. In the span of just a few hours, he had gone from being a distant figure of security to becoming someone Charlotte could depend on. The transformation felt both natural and profound. Thomas knew that the easy part of this situation was now behind them. The real work would begin when they had to explain Charlotte's behavior to the adults in her life and implement changes that would help prevent similar incidents in the future. But, for now, he focused on the simple act of walking beside a brave little girl who had found the courage to trust him with her fears. As they reached the end of the corridor, Thomas could hear voices ahead, concerned staff members who had clearly been searching for the princess. He prepared himself to handle the questions and concerns that would inevitably follow, while keeping his primary focus on Charlotte's emotional needs. The princess squeezed his hand one more time before they rounded the corner, a small gesture that conveyed both gratitude and a request for continued support. Thomas squeezed back, silently renewing his promise to help her navigate whatever challenges lay ahead. The second phase of their journey together was about to begin, one that would require even more skill and dedication than the physical rescue had demanded. Thomas felt ready for the challenge, knowing that he had already proven to himself and to Charlotte that he could be the kind of protector she truly needed. The moment Thomas and Princess Charlotte appeared in the main corridor, they were immediately surrounded by a flurry of concerned palace staff. Lady Margaret Thornberry, Charlotte's principal governess, rushed forward with obvious relief mixed with barely controlled anxiety. "Your Royal Highness! Where have you been?" "We've been searching everywhere for you," Lady Margaret exclaimed, her usual composed demeanor showing cracks of genuine worry. Behind her, two other tutors and a member of the household security team waited with expressions of concern and curiosity. Thomas could feel Charlotte's hand tighten in his as the attention focused on her. He positioned himself slightly in front of the princess, creating a subtle barrier between her and the assembled group. His years of experience had taught him to read situations quickly, and he could sense that Charlotte was becoming overwhelmed by the sudden scrutiny. "Lady Margaret," Thomas said respectfully but firmly, "Her Royal Highness is safe and unharmed. She experienced some distress earlier and sought a quiet place to compose herself. I believe it would be best if we could speak privately about the circumstances." Lady Margaret's eyes sharpened as she caught the underlying message in Thomas's careful words. As the person responsible for Charlotte's daily care and education, she was accustomed to reading between the lines when it came to the princess's behavior. She quickly dismissed the other staff members with polite but clear instructions to return to their duties. Of course, Lady Margaret agreed, though Thomas could see questions forming in her expression. "Your Royal Highness, shall we go to the morning room where we can sit comfortably?" She addressed Charlotte directly, but her eyes remained on Thomas, clearly understanding that he had become an important part of whatever had transpired. The three of them made their way to a smaller, more intimate room that served as Charlotte's informal study space. The morning room was decorated in soft blues and golds, with comfortable chairs arranged around a fireplace and shelves filled with books suitable for a child of Charlotte's age and education level. As they settled into chairs, Thomas remained standing until Lady Margaret gestured for him to join them. This small act showed that she recognized his role had evolved beyond that of a typical security guard. Charlotte chose the chair closest to Thomas, a detail that didn't escape Lady Margaret's notice. "Now then," Lady Margaret began gently, directing her attention to Charlotte, "can you tell me what happened this morning? You missed your French lesson and your piano practice, and we were quite worried when we couldn't find you." Charlotte glanced at Thomas, who nodded encouragingly. The princess took a deep breath and began to explain about the angry voices she had heard. As she spoke, Thomas watched Lady Margaret's face carefully, noting how the governess's expression shifted from concern to understanding and, then, to what appeared to be resignation. "I see," Lady Margaret said softly when Charlotte finished her account. "The voices frightened you, and you felt you needed to find somewhere safe to wait until they stopped." She paused, clearly choosing her next words carefully. "Your Royal Highness, you know that you can always come to me when you feel scared or upset, don't you?" Charlotte nodded, but Thomas could see hesitation in her response. "I didn't want to bother you," the princess said quietly. "And sometimes the angry voices are about things that grown-ups say children shouldn't worry about." Lady Margaret's expression grew troubled at this revelation. Thomas realized that Charlotte had been carrying this burden for much longer than anyone had understood. The princess had been trying to protect the adults around her by not revealing how much the household tensions were affecting her. "Your Royal Highness," Thomas interjected gently, "may I share with Lady Margaret what we discussed about it not being your responsibility to fix grown-up problems?" Charlotte nodded, and Thomas continued. The princess has been carrying some guilt about the disagreements she's overheard, feeling that she might somehow be responsible for them. Lady Margaret's face showed genuine distress at this information. "Oh, my dear child," she said, moving her chair closer to Charlotte's. "You are absolutely not responsible for any disagreements between adults. Those conversations have nothing to do with you, and you should never feel that you need to hide your feelings to protect us." The conversation that followed was delicate but necessary. Lady Margaret, with Thomas's support, helped Charlotte understand that seeking help when feeling scared was not only acceptable but encouraged. They discussed alternative places Charlotte could go when feeling upset, people she could talk to, and signals she could use if she needed immediate support. During this discussion, Thomas found himself taking on an unexpected role as an advocate for Charlotte's emotional needs. His perspective as both a trained security professional and a father gave him insights that complemented Lady Margaret's educational expertise. Together, they began to develop a support plan that would help Charlotte feel more secure. "I think it would be beneficial," Thomas suggested carefully, "if Her Royal Highness had a way to communicate her feelings before they become overwhelming. Perhaps a system where she can discreetly signal when she's feeling anxious, allowing someone to help her before she feels the need to hide." Lady Margaret considered this suggestion thoughtfully. "That's an excellent idea, Sergeant Mitchell. We could develop a simple code that Charlotte could use with any of her regular caregivers." She turned to the princess. "What do you think, Your Royal Highness? Would that help you feel safer?" Charlotte nodded eagerly, clearly relieved that adults were taking her feelings seriously and working to find practical solutions. "Could Sergeant Mitchell be one of the people I could signal?" she asked hopefully. Thomas felt his heart clench at the trust evident in her request. "If Lady Margaret and your family approve, I would be honored to be part of your support team, Your Royal Highness," he replied formally, though his tone was warm. Lady Margaret looked at Thomas with new appreciation. She had initially seen him simply as the guard who had found Charlotte, but now she recognized him as someone who had formed a meaningful connection with the princess and could be a valuable ally in supporting her emotional well-being. "I believe that would be entirely appropriate," Lady Margaret agreed. "Sergeant Mitchell has clearly demonstrated his commitment to your welfare beyond mere physical security." She paused, then added, "However, we will need to address the underlying issues that caused this situation in the first place." This comment led to a more serious conversation about the household dynamics that had been affecting Charlotte. Thomas shared his observations about the pattern of fear Charlotte had described, while Lady Margaret provided context about recent family tensions that had apparently been more visible to the princess than anyone had realized. "We need to consider how family discussions are conducted when children are in the vicinity," Lady Margaret concluded. "And we may need to seek additional professional guidance to help Her Royal Highness develop better coping strategies." Charlotte listened to this adult conversation with remarkable maturity, occasionally asking questions that showed she understood more about her situation than many had given her credit for. Thomas was impressed by her insight and her willingness to participate in planning her own support system. As their meeting drew to a close, specific plans began to take shape. Lady Margaret would speak with senior family members about creating more child-friendly spaces for sensitive discussions. Thomas would work with the security team to establish protocols for supporting Charlotte when she felt distressed. Most importantly, Charlotte would have multiple people she could turn to when feeling overwhelmed. "Before we finish," Thomas said, "I'd like to suggest that we check in with Her Royal Highness regularly about how these new arrangements are working. Children's needs can change quickly, and we want to make sure our support system remains effective." Both Lady Margaret and Charlotte agreed enthusiastically to this proposal. The princess seemed particularly pleased that her ongoing feelings and opinions would be considered important in maintaining the support system they were creating. As they prepared to return to Charlotte's regular schedule, Thomas could see a remarkable transformation in the princess's demeanor. Where there had been fear and withdrawal, there was now hope and engagement. The adults in her life had not only listened to her concerns but had taken concrete steps to address them. "Sergeant Mitchell," Charlotte said as they stood to leave, "thank you for finding me in the cabinet and for helping everyone understand." Her formal words carried genuine gratitude that touched everyone present. Thomas bowed slightly in acknowledgement of her thanks, understanding that this moment marked not an ending but a new beginning in his relationship with the princess and his role in her life. The storm that had driven Charlotte to hide was far from over, but now she had a team of people committed to helping her weather it safely. 3 weeks had passed since the morning Thomas found Princess Charlotte hiding in the antique cabinet. The changes that followed that discovery had rippled through the palace in ways both subtle and profound. Thomas had watched with satisfaction as the support system they had designed began to take root and flourish. The new protocols worked remarkably well. Charlotte had used her discreet signal system twice in the intervening weeks, both times alerting Thomas to her growing anxiety before it became overwhelming. On the first occasion, she had simply needed reassurance during a particularly tense family meeting that was taking place nearby. Thomas had quietly arranged for her to spend time in the garden with one of her tutors until the discussion concluded. The second incident had been more complex. Charlotte had overheard a telephone conversation that worried her about potential changes to her education schedule. Rather than hiding or allowing her anxiety to build, she had signaled Lady Margaret, who was able to sit down with the princess and explain the actual situation, which was far less dramatic than what Charlotte had imagined. Thomas had been impressed by how quickly Charlotte had adapted to using the support system. The princess demonstrated remarkable emotional intelligence for someone her age, learning to recognize her own feelings and reach out for help before they became unmanageable. This proactive approach had prevented any return to the desperate hiding behavior that had initially brought them together. The broader changes within the palace household had been equally encouraging. Senior family members had taken Lady Margaret's recommendations seriously, implementing new guidelines for conducting sensitive discussions when children were present. Private meeting rooms were now designated for conversations that might be upsetting if overheard, and staff were trained to be more aware of young ears that might be listening. Thomas had also noticed a change in his own role within the palace hierarchy. While he remained primarily a security guard, he had gained recognition as someone with particular insight into the needs of the younger royals. His commanding officer had even suggested that he might be interested in specialized training related to child protection and trauma response. This expansion of his responsibilities felt natural to Thomas. His years of experience as both a father and a protector had prepared him well for this hybrid role. He found deep satisfaction in knowing that his work contributed not just to physical security, but to the emotional well-being of those under his protection. The relationship between Thomas and Charlotte had evolved into something unique within the formal structure of palace life. While maintaining all proper protocols and respect for hierarchy, they had developed a connection based on mutual trust and genuine care. Charlotte clearly felt safe with Thomas, and he had become genuinely invested in her happiness and development. Lady Margaret had proven to be an invaluable ally in supporting Charlotte's progress. Her educational background and deep understanding of child development complemented Thomas's practical experience and protective instincts. Together, they had created an environment where Charlotte could express her concerns freely while learning healthy ways to cope with the inevitable stresses of her unique position. The professional counselor who had been brought in to work with Charlotte had also played a crucial role in her recovery. Dr. Sarah Williams specialized in helping children from high-profile families deal with the particular pressures of their circumstances. Her sessions with Charlotte had focused on building emotional resilience and developing age-appropriate understanding of the adult world around her. "The princess has made remarkable progress," Dr. Williams had told Thomas and Lady Margaret during one of their coordination meetings. "She's learned to externalize her worries instead of internalizing them as guilt or responsibility. This is a sophisticated emotional skill that many adults struggle with." Thomas had been particularly pleased to learn that Charlotte was sleeping better and had shown renewed enthusiasm for her studies and recreational activities. The piano lessons she had missed on the morning of the incident had become one of her favorite parts of the week again. Her music teacher reported that Charlotte's playing had become more expressive and confident. The princess had also begun to show leadership qualities that impressed all her caregivers. During a visit from other children in her extended family, Charlotte had demonstrated remarkable empathy when one of her younger cousins became upset. She had calmly implemented some of the coping strategies she had learned, helping the other child feel better while alerting adults to the situation. "Your Royal Highness has become quite the helper," Lady Margaret had observed to Thomas after witnessing Charlotte's compassionate response to her cousin's distress. "She's turning her own difficult experience into a way to help others." This transformation from victim to helper represented significant emotional growth for Charlotte. Thomas understood that her ability to use her experience constructively showed true resilience and maturity. It also suggested that the support system they had created was not just helping her cope, but was actually strengthening her character. The antique cabinet in the blue drawing room had taken on new significance within the palace. Rather than being simply a repository for old documents, it had become a symbol of sanctuary and safety. Thomas often found staff members pausing to look at it with new appreciation for its role in Charlotte's story. Charlotte herself had returned to visit the cabinet several times, but now as a place of reflection rather than refuge. She had asked Thomas to accompany her during these visits, using the quiet moments to talk about her feelings and her progress. These conversations had become some of Thomas's most treasured moments at work. "I don't think I'll ever need to hide in there again," Charlotte had told him during their most recent visit. "But I'm glad it was there when I needed it, and I'm glad you found me." Her words carried a wisdom that continued to amaze Thomas. The success of Charlotte's recovery had not gone unnoticed by other members of the royal family. Several had privately thanked Thomas for his compassionate handling of the situation and his ongoing support of the princess. His actions had earned him respect that extended far beyond his official rank. Thomas had also received recognition from his own superiors within the palace security structure. His commanding officer had recommended him for commendation, citing his exemplary service that went above and beyond normal security duties to ensure the welfare of those under our protection. More importantly to Thomas, his own family had expressed pride in his work. His daughter, who was close to Charlotte's age, had been particularly impressed when he shared appropriate details about helping a scared child feel safe. "You're like a superhero, Dad," she had told him, words that meant more than any official recognition. As Thomas reflected on the events that had brought such positive change to Princess Charlotte's life, he understood that his role had evolved in ways he never could have anticipated. What had begun as a routine security patrol had become a profound lesson in the importance of paying attention, showing compassion, and taking action when someone needed help. The experience had also taught Thomas valuable lessons about the complexity of life within the royal household. Behind the grandeur and formality, there were real people dealing with real emotions and challenges. His work was not just about protecting against external threats, but about recognizing and addressing the more subtle dangers that could threaten the well-being of those he served. Looking toward the future, Thomas felt optimistic about Charlotte's continued growth and development. The foundation of trust and support they had built would serve her well as she navigated the unique challenges of growing up in the public eye. She had learned early in life that it was not only acceptable but wise to seek help when needed. The morning sun now cast its familiar shadows across the palace floors as Thomas continued his daily patrols. But these corridors no longer felt routine to him. Each day brought the possibility of making a real difference in someone's life, just as that autumn morning when he heard a frightened child's cry for help from within an antique cabinet. Thomas walked these halls with renewed purpose, knowing that his vigilance extended beyond physical security to encompass the emotional safety and well-being of all those under his protection. The discovery of Princess Charlotte had changed not just her life, but his understanding of what it truly meant to serve and protect the royal family. As he passed the blue drawing room on his morning rounds, Thomas paused for a moment to glance at the cabinet that had started it all. It stood silent and dignified, keeping its secrets and holding its place in history. But now it also held the memory of a transformation, of a frightened child who found safety, and a guard who discovered that sometimes the most important rescues happen not from external dangers, but from the fears and anxieties that can overwhelm a young heart. The story that began with fear and hiding had become one of hope, growth, and the power of human connection. Princess Charlotte was thriving, surrounded by people who understood her needs and supported her development. Thomas had found new meaning in his work and deeper satisfaction in service that extended beyond duty to encompass genuine care and protection. Their journey together would continue, but the foundation they had built was strong. Trust, communication, and compassion had transformed a crisis into an opportunity for growth and connection. The palace halls that had once echoed with a child's frightened cries now resonated with the confident footsteps of a princess who knew she was loved, supported, and safe.